Another year of movies has come and gone. Like the few years before it, it really did seem to be mostly filled with sequels and remakes. There were a few originals here and there, however, a couple of which may make this list. A couple of notes before we start. Normally I would limit my top 10 films list to theatrical, but there was one streaming exclusive in particular that made me change my mind since I believed that not including it would be a crime. Also, keep in mind this is my list. Yours will probably be different as everyone's tastes are different. Also, if your favorite films aren't on the list, there is the possibility that I may just have not seen it. If so, I would appreciate your lists in the comments below. Who knows, there may be one or two that I didn't see that I will wish I had put on the list after I see them based on your recommendations. But without further ado, here's my top 10 new films I saw in 2023. Number 10. Blue Beetle. Yeah, I know what you're going to say. Didn't that movie flop terribly? Well, yeah, but so did practically everything else. This was not a good year for box office. And in an age where people would rather wait for streaming than pay to go to the cinema, box office numbers don't mean much for anything anymore. Now, while I would never claim Blue Beetle to be a terrific film, or even one of the best superhero films, I found it to be a pleasant surprise. Yeah, there isn't anything particularly original about it. It's honestly mostly your pretty standard superhero origin story, but underlying it was a surprising amount of heart behind the characters that hasn't always been present in a lot of contemporary CGI blockbusters, and I also thought it was just a really fun, well-made movie with a good cast and a decent script, and for that reason, I think it deserves a spot on this list. Number 9. The Super Mario Bros. Movie. I thought Illumination did a really good job bringing this world and these characters to life in a way that stayed true to the games but still felt believable enough. Well, maybe not believable, but it made sense within the world of a cartoon. Things like the power-ups and the floating blocks could have come across as just silly insertions, but they made sense within the context of the story the way it was written. All in all, a very enjoyable film that paid loving homage to the source material, while also managing to craft a decent story and make a fun movie for everyone. Number 8. Shazam! Fury of the Gods. This is another one of those films which did not do so well at the box office, but I think deserved better. A sequel, of course, to the 2019 DCEU film Shazam, this one was just a lot of fun. Had some pretty good action, pretty good humor. I mean, not all of the humor landed for me, but most of it did. That's all I got to say. It's a good, fun movie for the family to enjoy together. Very underrated. Going from one DC film to the next, at number 7 we have Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. 2023 marked the end of the DCEU, the failed cinematic universe that began in 2013 with Zack Snyder's The Man of Steel. Yeah, this universe definitely had its ups and downs. When it was down, it was really down. And when it was up, it was usually pretty good. I don't think the universe was ever as good as it could have or should have been, even in its best moments. However, no one could argue that the most successful film in the franchise, at least financially, was undoubtedly 2018's Aquaman. Apparently the highest grossing DC film ever made. Unfortunately for the sequel, it became another victim of the mixture of franchise fatigue audiences are having and the I'll wait for streaming attitude that has been plaguing the box office lately. It may not be quite as good as the first one, but director James Wan and the whole team delivered a really fun adventure movie that should at least get more appreciation than it did. Number 6. The Flash. Okay guys, I seriously did not mean to do this. Put 3 DC movies in a row. That's just genuinely where they ranked on the list. And I'm sorry, but this film gets a lot of unnecessary hate. Mostly from people who didn't even bother to watch it before jumping on the, oh, the CGI is terrible and therefore the movie is awful bandwagon. I'm not trying to criticize anyone, I just don't think that's a fair assessment for any film. It's true that this movie had a lot of hurdles to face. Constant adjustments due to changes in leadership of WB and the dying DCEU, controversy surrounding its main star, etc. But I really do think it's one of my favorite films to come from the so-called Snyderverse or Hamadaverse or whatever you want to call this era of DCEU. As an adaptation of the popular Flashpoint storyline, it's very loose, but the heart of the story remains the same. That being a very well done examination of the grief the Flash faces from the loss of his parents. Putting him with Batman helped to emphasize that plot point, with the Flash being the only superhero who has the ability to try and fix what many others have faced. It's a heartbreaking story at its core, learning that you can't change the past. I think overall it handled the emotion pretty well. Also, the Batman stuff in this film is awesome from both Keaton and Affleck. Director Andy Muschietti did the Batman stuff really well, and I'm really looking forward to seeing him helm the Brave and the Bold. The problems this film faced, I don't feel were his fault. I also have to admit all the references in this film were really fun to see, from Keaton to Nicolas Cage to Christopher Reeve. I really wish this had been the end of the DCEU instead of Aquaman. Really feels like much more of a finale, which is what it was meant to be before James Gunn decided to come in and just scrap everything, well, practically everything. But I understand, they just wanted to get all these films out there and over with as soon as possible, so Gunn could have his day. This film never had a chance. Fair enough. I'm looking forward to seeing what Gunn does, and there was always a part of me, however, that will wonder what it would have been like had this been allowed to lean more into the new era than it did. Number 5. Megan. Next on the list is actually the first film I went to see in 2023. With a budget of $12 million and a worldwide gross of $181 million at the box office, this Blumhouse flick about AI gone wrong and the dangers of letting technology raise your kids was one of the most financially successful films of the year. Much of that was due to the excellent marketing aided by the well-known dance starting a TikTok trend, which quickly propelled the titular killer doll into a household name. However, I think no matter the marketing, it wouldn't have been such a great success if the movie was terrible. While the concept of a killer doll isn't by any means a new one, the film still used a good combination of heart, dark humor, and a good cast, some decent scares, and a good script to create a unique and entertaining new entry into the genre. To me, this doesn't really feel like anything that's come before. It's its own unique thing, which was desperately needed this year. Unique things amongst all the sequels and remakes and franchise installments. Speaking of which, Megan 2.0 is supposed to come out in 2025, and I'm looking forward to seeing where the story goes from there. There were multiple times in the movie where they were clearly setting up for a possible sequel, so I'm curious to see where it goes. Number 4. Godzilla Minus One. 2023 featured a return for Godzilla to his native home country of Japan, after having spent the last few years moonlighting in America with Legendary's MonsterVerse. I do want to pause here to mention that I will not, unlike some, be using this film's success to bash the equally successful aforementioned MonsterVerse, as I do enjoy both. And you can enjoy both. That's alright, they're very different types of beasts, literally. While the MonsterVerse films are very much monster punch monster popcorn action flicks, this film does an excellent job throwing back to Godzilla's earliest days as a force of nature, wreaking havoc on the unfortunate citizens of Japan. Taking place in the aftermath of World War II, the film follows a former kamikaze pilot who is both shamed by members of the community for not having fulfilled his duty and racked with guilt due to having frozen during a Godzilla attack on a small island, which resulted in lives lost. Upon arriving at home, he meets a young woman and assists her in raising a small child who was orphaned during the bombings of Tokyo. The three form a pretty happy life together, or at least as happy as it can be in the aftermath of World War II. But when Godzilla, now grown to gigantic proportions due to the US nuclear testing, invades, he joins the fight to save the already devastated Japan from complete destruction. Choosing to focus more on the human story rather than the non-stop action of some other Godzilla films allows for a much more thoughtful examination of the horrors of war and the value of human life. I don't need every Godzilla film to be like this. I like the Monster Punch Monster too, as I said, but this was a refreshing change and just a pretty good movie in general. Number 3. Here we are, the film that made me decide to allow streaming movies to be included in this list. Released in September on Hulu by 20th Century Studios, No One Will Save You follows a young woman named Bryn, played by Caitlin Dever, who has been ostracized by her community due to a tragic mistake in her past. When her home is invaded by an alien creature, she must find a way to survive on her own using whatever means necessary, as the rest of the town succumbs to the aliens' attack. This is a pretty small but extremely well put together film. I was impressed. With only 5 lines of dialogue throughout the entire runtime, It's a perfect example of show, don't tell. It's one of those thrillers that makes you want to keep watching. It sort of feels like a 90-minute version of a classic Twilight Zone episode, while also being its own thing. If you like well-made original sci-fi thrillers, this is one you should definitely check out if you haven't already. Number 2, Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. Never having played Dungeons & Dragons, and indeed not knowing very much about it, this movie was a bit of a surprise to me. I really didn't have much interest in going to see it until I saw the trailer in front of something else. It looked like it could be an amusing film, and it was. As a matter of fact, it was probably the funniest new film I saw last year. Though it was based on a beloved franchise, the characters were new, the world was new, so it just felt fresher than a lot of the franchise installments and sequels and remakes. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but it's nice to have something new. I really enjoyed this film, and I really liked the characters, and I know, having talked about being refreshing, new, and all that, it would be hypocritical to say this, but I do hope we get future installments with these characters because, well, I really enjoyed them, and I would very much like to see more of this world. And the number 1 spot goes to Wonka. So any of the last 5 probably could have gone on the top spot. I don't know. This was a really hard list to rank. I almost didn't rank them in a certain order, like just doing like release order because I didn't want to put, one before another, but because I like them all so much. But yeah, I don't know. That wouldn't have been as interesting, so I'll just put Wonka at the top, I thought. I was pretty intrigued when I heard director Paul King was working on a Willy Wonka prequel. I really enjoyed what he did with the Paddington films, and I was looking forward to seeing what he would do in the world of Roald Dahl. What ended up coming out was a charming family musical full of heart, humor, fun songs, and Hugh Grant as an Oompa Loompa. Timothée Chalamet pulled off a really successful performance as a younger, more optimistic Willy Wonka. Although now I kind of want to see the story of what happened to him exactly to change him into the older, more jaded Wonka of the original story. My only real complaint about this film was that there wasn't enough of Hugh Grant as an Oompa Loompa, but it still deserves a spot on the list anyway. So yeah, there's my list. Do you agree with my list? Do you disagree with my list? What would you put on your list? Let me know in the comments below, and if there's a movie on your list that I haven't seen, I'd like to check it out. I heard Barbie was really good. Should I check that one out? Let me know in the comments below. And I'll see you in a few days, or at least within the next week, I plan to release a video with my top most anticipated films of 2024. So until then, guys, don't forget to click like and subscribe and all that other cliche YouTube stuff, and I will talk to you later. I've been Chester Westerford. Goodbye for now.